I'm gonna make a bet with you. I currently don't understand anything about building, but by the end of this week, I will. But why are you doing this, I hear you ask, as I'm schizophrenic. Well, stop me if this feels familiar. I always had insane pipe dreams, and wanted to learn impossible sounding things. But every time I would mention it, I was just told by everyone to keep my head down, and maybe find a more achievable goal. I was just not made for it. Well, I'm completely and utterly sick of it. So, this is the game plan. Step 1. Learn how to build in Minecraft while making increasingly complicated builds. Step 2. Use that to prove that with enough time spent improving, anyone can learn anything, no matter how impossible it might feel. And step 3. Hopefully not fail, which would accidentally prove everyone else right. No pressure. So, can you learn 15 years of building in a week? To find out, I first needed to quickly build something as a baseline, to get us all to the same page. And now it's time for the great reveal. This is gonna set the starting point to this already impossible challenge. Everything depends on this. So, how did I do? Okay, so it wasn't great. Which, I mean, does also mean that this challenge is going to be even harder than I thought it was going to be. But, if I wanted any chance of successfully finishing this challenge, I just had to start. Which brings me to the main problem of the baseline build. It had a very basic and boring shape. A thing that could never pass in the huge mega build I had planned for day 7. There are 6 lessons that are built on top of one another, that I'm going to need to learn during the next 6 days if I want any chance of not failing this challenge. And the first one should solve the shape problem. Before starting to actually build, quickly plan out the shape of the build, without thinking of what blocks you're going to be using in the actual build, or any of that gay shit, or any of that happy stuff. So I now knew what I needed to do, but could I actually do it? No. Shut up. To find out, I needed to just bite the bullet and start building the first official day 1 build that I had planned. A haunted house. Ooh, spooky. I sure hope I don't get a ghostly blowjob. So, like the good kid that I am, I started out by planning the build. That was weird. Don't call yourself a good kid. Don't tell me what to do. It started out quite well. I was pretty confident in myself. All unearned, of course, as we will soon learn. But it was all unearned. Told ya. You see, after quickly building the basic plan, I started building the actual build. Doesn't sound that bad, right? Well, little did I know, this instantly doomed the entire build. Yeah, I know. Filled with all of my unearned confidence, I didn't bother to actually finish the plan, and just started building whatever felt right. Chaos. Sheer, absolute chaos. There was chaos, in case you couldn't tell. It's a lot of chaos. After I finished building the first... that wasn't where you were supposed to gasp at all. I know what I did. As I was saying, after I finished building the first floor, I was left with a pretty decent build, at least compared to the disaster that was soon to arrive. Speaking of which, it was time to build the second floor. It didn't get off to a great start. No. It didn't look right. And I just kept on trying again and again, but it just wouldn't work. And again, I tried a few times, is my point. But this was just the start of it. I then thought, for some reason, that, oh, do you know what will fix this disaster? Part of the roof being blue. I mean, the build was basically just one color, but still. As I was saying, I tried making part of the roof blue, but it didn't work in any way, shape, or form. At this point, I was starting to lose all the confidence I had. If I can't even build such a tiny, pathetic, rotting house, how was I going to build any of the things I had planned for the rest of this video? In just a couple of measly days. I was starting to think that maybe everyone else was right, and maybe I should just keep my head down and just give up. But I knew I couldn't. This was just about me. This was about proving a point and showing other people what they can become. That's pretentious. Just a bit much. Yeah, sorry. But still, I knew that I had to keep going, even if this build wasn't going to turn out great. So I kept going, and yeah, it didn't. It's got bad. Not great, not at all. But it was fine. I was just going to have to learn to use both the first and second lesson on the next build on day 2. I'm fucked. Which brings me to the biggest problem of this build, the blue roof. But to be able to understand why that was such a big deal, we need to first understand the basic concept of a block palette. As you know, every build is made out of blocks. At least I hope you know. Have you heard of Minecraft? It's a game, blocks. And simply put, a block palette is the types of blocks that you use. So, quickly going back to our build, the problem is that the block palette of this build is full of blocks that just don't work together. So how can we fix this? How can we make sure that the blocks we build with are going to come together to create a good block palette? Well, we just need to pick the block palette for the entire build before we start placing a single block of the actual build. I'm not suggesting some I'm not suggesting you use some sort of ghost blocks for the palettes. I mean, can you imagine? So, hoping that I understood how block palettes work, I attempted to make my first ever one on my day to build, the Hobbit Hall. And I better hope that I get it right on the first go, as we don't want a recreation of the haunted house. Anyways, after I picked out my block palette, I had to start. Oh, and don't forget, I also needed to successfully plan out a full build for the first time during this build. So, I started planning out the build using green wool. At this point I was really needing the Hobbit Hall to turn out good, for the sake of my confidence. So even though I wasn't feeling great about my chances, I just kept going. After a pretty short while, I was done with the planning phase. And it was great! The entire thing had a great shape. Which sadly also meant that there was much more to lose if it turns out that the block palette I chose was wrong. So, with the pressure now on, I kept on building. First I placed the grass, then the door, which I managed to get to look right after a couple of attempts, which gave me some confidence, then the trail leading up to it, and finally, the plants surrounding the house. And before I knew it, the build turned out great. It actually looked like something not built by someone who started learning a day ago. Me, I'm the a day ago learning. And I had already improved a ton since starting to learn a day ago. So, my spirits were back up, and I was starting to feel like I can actually do this. Like I can actually prove everyone else wrong. For me, and for everyone else that was ever told they can't achieve their dreams. I'm a hero. But now it was time to have that belief tested. And tested it will be, as, before my first ever mega build that I had planned on day 4, it was time for easily my biggest challenge yet. The Encanto house. Yes, the entire huge ass thing. From a tiny Hobbit Hall to that. But by that I mean the Encanto house, in case it wasn't clear. Can someone check on those beliefs? Which brings me to the next problem standing in between me and my goal, which I was lucky enough to avoid in the previous build. You see, I planned this build to be pretty fucking big. And can you think of a reason that might be a problem? Maintenance. Bigger houses require more cleaning and maintenance, which can be time consuming and expensive. Cost higher mortgage payments and utility bills constrain the family budget, especially if the extra space turns out to be more than you realistically need. Did you read that off the internet? I wanted to participate. That's right. Even with an interesting shape, there's no way that those huge walls were going to look good. So, how can we save this build? Well, we'll get back to that later, because I had no time to waste. I needed to get started on my biggest, most complex build yet. Not wasting any time, I started with the usual, planning the build. I was still riding the high of the, to be honest, quite impressive success of the previous build, and I was feeling great about this build. But like all good things, and also not good things, just overall thing, it didn't last forever. As I previously said, this build was easily my biggest build yet, which also means that it takes an annoyingly long amount of time to build. Time that while building, my brain used well. Is that sarcasm? Yes. At this point, I was already around 3 hours into the exhausting building process, and it really didn't feel like I was getting any closer. Every time I would move back to see how it looks, I just felt like there was no way in hell I can save this build. I mean, just look at this! This looks like a 3-year-old's drawing of the Encanto house. Not an, insert age, Minecraft build of it. I think some part of me knew that this was probably only because all the walls were still very flat and had a boring shape, but that wasn't enough to keep my spirits up. It might have just been because I had spent 3 hours on this build, which was the longest I had spent on a build up to that point, and it still looked this bad. And maybe I was just psyching myself out, but I wasn't feeling great about my chances of successfully finishing this build. Not to mention this entire challenge, that I only had 4 days left on. But, like I always do, I kept going. Slowly but surely, I started adding in the details, and it was starting to take shape. Aha! My confidence was starting to creep its way back to me, but there was still one barrier between it and me. Those huge, boring walls. That, without the help of a new lesson, could never look good. So, how can we solve this? Well, thankfully, this is where lesson 3 comes in. Gradients. Oh, thank God for gradients! Wait, what are gradients? In case you don't know, a gradient is kind of like a smooth transition between 2 different colors or shades. But how can you use that in Minecraft? Well, to create a gradient, I would need to use multiple different blocks that smoothly transition from each other between 2 points, which, at least theoretically, would make a convincing gradient. So, now we knew what I had to do. It was time to test if I can actually successfully do it. I first started with the purple wall. Using what I had learned about making sure your colors work together before using them, I quickly chose a few blocks and placed them next to each other on the ground, making sure they worked well. Which they did. Yippee! Now to use them in the actual build. It took a few tries, but I managed to get the purple to look pretty damn good. Smash! I then continued on to the rest of the build. Red, nice. Yellow, great. Then green, blue, a few small details. And after 5.5 hours of work, But now we get to easily the biggest problem we faced so far. The encounter house build took almost 6 hours to complete. This might not sound that bad, until I tell you that the build I had planned for the 4th day of this challenge, and the first mega build of this video, was the Disney intro castle. Yes, that thing. The entire thing, all of it, in a day. There is absolutely no way I will be able to do that in a day. When the encounter build, that is tiny in comparison to it, took almost 6 hours. So what am I going to do? Am I going to give up and prove that everyone else was right? Everyone that doubted me? No, I could never do that. You know me. Yeah, I know you. We're best friends. Stop it. So what are we gonna do? Well, there's actually a great solution. But before we reveal the solution, let me just quickly ask you to make sure you subscribe, which you clearly did let me, as I just did. My parents said that if I reach 100,000 subscribers, they'll finally love me. But they didn't really say that. It was more like implied. No, not really implied either. Just let me have hope. So please consider subscribing. Please. Wait, where were we? Alright, there's actually a great solution. WorldEdit. In case you don't know, WorldEdit is basically a mod that adds a ton of commands that are very useful to the building process, and that can speed it up by a lot. Only one small problem. I have no idea how to use it. Like, at all. So, that means that, as well as building my first ever mega build 4 days into this challenge, I'm also going to need to learn the tool that makes that possible in the first place. Welp, if I want any chance of not failing, I better get going. After learning some of the basics on YouTube, I started by attempting to create the river leading up to the castle gate. It didn't get off to the best start, but I'm sure it's quickly going to get better. After I finished making the river, almost 40 minutes into this build, it was time to make the gate leading up to it. It's a very basic shape. I'm sure I can do this. Probably. Or at least I hope, because I have no idea how I'm going to finish this build if I can't. I quickly made the base of the 2 main pillars, then tried using WorldEdit to connect them in an arch. Great mistake. I quickly found myself, here? I don't even know how I got here, to be honest. I tried using what I learned in-game, which didn't work, so I just built it by hand. Not a great start to my first ever mega build. But it's fine, because now it was time to fill the gate in. I tried doing this, which really didn't work. I'm not sure how clear I made it in this voiceover, but at this point I was more than an hour into this build, and not feeling great about my chances of successfully finishing this challenge. So I took a break. I was sitting on my bed and just thinking. And, after a couple of minutes of doing this, I had a realization. I was using WorldEdit wrong. WorldEdit is just a bunch of commands that use math, meaning that it's good at repetitive tasks. So not, for example, filling in a tiny area of blocks in a complex shape in a single well-chosen command. But in a good way this time. So I now knew what I had to do, and quickly jumped out of my bed. After quickly filling in the gate, I was starting to more or less understand how WorldEdit works. Just 40 minutes after returning from my break, I had already finished building the gate and the towers next to it. Next came the main wall of the actual castle, then I took a quick break to do the same, then the building next to it, then the tower next to that. I was doing great. During this entire time I was constantly afraid that I made some awful mistake that I didn't notice, but I just kept on soldiering through. And as I was doing that, I was starting to become more and more proficient. But this build was taking long. Like, way too long. As I was building this, I was constantly checking the time. 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours. By the time I had finished the sketch, I had spent over 9 hours on this build. I wasn't going to let this build beat me, but it was getting late. The day was over. I failed. What could I even do? Well, I didn't really have anything planned for the next day, day 5. So I guess I could continue working on this build then. I mean, there was no reason I couldn't finish it tomorrow. So, I logged off for day 4, which brings me to day 5, that I was going to finish my first ever mega build, if everything goes right. It was now time for the most important part of this build, texturing. But why is texturing of all things so important? Well, a mega build with a great shape but bad texturing isn't a mega build at all, meaning that if I get this wrong, all that time spent building yesterday was a waste of time. How fun! I love stressless Minecraft. Haha, same bestie. Stop! I quickly started by picking out a block palette, which, after a few tries, I managed to get to not even look awful. I quickly started texturing, but I was going way too fast. This caused me to not be able to really control what I'm doing, at least not well. So, how do you solve this unsolvable problem? Just fucking slow down. Just texture slowly. It's not that hard at all. So after I figured this out, I had all the knowledge I need. Dumb hoe. So after I figured this out, I meant like the curve. Not the gardening tool. I was insulting you, is what I was doing. So after I figured this out, I had all the knowledge I needed to finish texturing. I quickly textured all of the walls and all of the towers with the same gradient, and then did the same thing for all of the roofs. Use the same gradient for the roof? No. You know what, never mind. And after a surprisingly short amount of time, I had finished my first ever mega build. So I now only had one day left before I need to finish this challenge by building the final mega build, so I better use it well. I used it to finish planning the mega build on day 7. Oh well, that's fine. What did you end up planning? So I'd say that was time well spent. Anyways, day 7. I started day 7 off by attempting to build the trunk of the tree. This was the final build, so I had to get it right. It looked awful, because of course it did. Surprisingly, the biggest issue I was facing was just making it look natural. It looked strange. Doctor Strange. No, I'm getting copyrighted. Maybe it was because of all the pressure I had put on myself to have this look good. Or maybe it actually did look strange. Doc, no, we already went through this. Don't fucking do that. But it really didn't matter to me. I was just going to keep on going. Which brings me to the final lesson of this video. The last thing you need to know to actually understand building. Trust your instincts. Trust the process. Especially when it feels like you shouldn't. And like this isn't going to work out. So, I kept this exact lesson in the back of my mind. I just kept on building. And it worked, because of course it did, I am a genius! As I kept on building, I saw this tree that not too long ago looked strange and unnatural come to life in front of my eyes. First the trunk, then the branches coming off of it, then the branches coming off of them, then the plan for the leaves, the textured leaves, and for the final time for this challenge, in just over 4 hours, it was done. If you enjoyed that stupid-ass video and you want more stupidacity from me, you can follow my Twitter. And if you'd rather eat your own hand than go on that fucking hell site, you can watch my previous video, where I learned 13 years of redstone in a week. Ooh, slightly different. Nothing better than the comforts of what's known. Enjoy!